So today we are going to be working in the workbook called Jesus Starts His Third Year in Ministry, which is, of course, the third year of his ministry, which is 29 AD. We are going to be working on chapter 4, Jesus Walks on Water, which is located in Matthew 14, 22 to 36. So now if I get to it, Jesus walks on water.
Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him in the other side while he dismissed the crowd.
This is Matthew's version of what John wrote at the end of last chapter. Here we see Jesus taking care of the disciples before he goes onto the mountain to pray. What did Jesus have his disciples do?
Get into the boat ahead of him.
Where are Jesus and his disciples before the disciples get in the boat?
Remote place near Bethsaida.
Right. And what does Jesus do to the crowd?
Dismiss the crowd.
Right. Think of how hard this would be to do. So this in itself is kind of a miracle because they wanted, they were demanding him become king, so all of a sudden he just kind of dismisses them, like that's a miracle in itself. Reminder, the whole point originally of going to Bethsaida was to what?
Eat and rest.
Right. Did each of them now have food to eat?
Yes.
What time of day is it?
Late in the day.
Right.
After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray.
Although we don't know exactly what Jesus prayed about, there are two things that would have been on his mind. What are these? What happened on page 21?
Death of John the Baptist.
And what happened on page 30?
Making him king.
Right. The people wanting him to be so king and how he's going to work through that. So those two things were definitely on his mind. This has been one long day. Let's review all that has happened on this one day. He is told what?
John the Baptist was beheaded.
But before he's able to have time to heal with John the Baptist's death, who comes back?
The apostles came back.
Right. He sees that the apostles need some time to rest after their journey, so they travel by boat to where?
Bethsaida.
Instead of peace and quiet, how many people are waiting for their arrival?
5,000 men.
Right. What does Jesus do with all these people?
Preaching the kingdom of God.
It becomes late in the day, but instead of sending the people away to eat, what does Jesus do?
Jesus and disciples feed them.
Right. So after all this, what does he still make time for?
To pray.
Right. What a busy day, but he still makes time to pray.
Yes. Later that night, he, Jesus, was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it.
John tells us where the disciples were attempting to sail to, John 6:17a, where they got in the boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. Generally, it would have taken about 4 hours to row from the northeast shore of Bethsaida to Capernaum. However, this trip took longer. The winds would have pushed them deeper into the Sea of Galilee. John also tells us how far they have traveled. John 6:19a, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles. Okay, so now, where was Jesus?
Alone on mountaintop praying.
And where were the disciples trying to row to?
Capernaum.
Right. What were the problems the disciples were having getting to Capernaum?
The wind.
Right. And what time of day is it?
Night.
Right. Technically, there would have been several boats as there are 12 apostles and perhaps other close disciples as well. So even though we always think of one boat, there's really probably a couple.
Yeah. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid."
So what time of day did Jesus walk out on the water to the disciples?
Before dawn.
Yeah, this would have made it between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. Remember, John had written that they had rowed about 3 to 4 miles. Therefore, it may have taken at least an hour for Jesus to get to them by walking. What did the disciples think Jesus was?
A ghost.
Is there evidence that the disciples believed in ghosts prior to their full understanding of what Jesus would be teaching them? Yes. Go ahead and read that.
Okay. While they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see I have."
What does Jesus say in response to the fear of the disciples?
Take courage, don't be afraid.
Right. It is a dark and stormy night with perhaps only a little light. How do you think the disciples could see Jesus walking on the water?
Well, because he's Jesus, or maybe the glow from the moon.
Yeah. Well, the glow from the moon, maybe his glory essence illuminated, you
Yes,
know.
yeah,
But you have to think of this practicality, really, how could I see him in the dark? So he must have had
exactly.
his glory.
Yeah, like halo.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, "Tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked to the water, and came towards Jesus.
Did Peter's desire to walk on the water show a lot of faith?
Yes, his faith is in Jesus.
Right. I mean, this is something we normally cannot do. So he has to
No,
have enough faith to believe he can do it if Jesus says he can.
yeah.
Matthew 14:28 starts with Lord.
If it's you,
A better interpretation would be Lord, since it's you. Did Peter walk on the water?
yes,
Who was Peter walking to?
Jesus,
Why was Peter able to walk on the water?
power of Jesus.
Right. Peter did not assume he could do it without Jesus's permission and power.
Mhm. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he says, "why did you doubt?"
What did Peter see that made him afraid?
The wind.
You're right. Remember, there's huge waves, because of
Yeah,
the wind. So, there might have been times where he couldn't see Jesus, and these things, he just, like us, the world disrupts his focus on Jesus. What happened once Peter became afraid?
he began to sink.
Who did Peter immediately cry out to?
Jesus
The best person to cry out to in times of fear, and that's true for us. What did Jesus do for Peter?
reached out his hand and caught him.
Yeah, just like he does for us when we ask. What did Jesus say to Peter?
You of little faith.
Yeah. Peter had great faith when it seemed easy. In faith, he was able to perform miracles. Like us, the world distracted him from his focus, and then he started to fear. Two major lessons are taught us here. First, if we trust Jesus, we have no need to fear. And if we are afraid, we should call out to him because he will help us through.
And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God."
So, who climbed into the boat?
Jesus and Peter,
Right. Who else was in the boat?
the disciples,
Right. What died down once they got into the boat?
the wind,
Wait a second. Who controls the wind?
Jesus.
So, did Jesus allow the wind to come to test the disciples' faith, or was it just a storm?
Yeah, it was a test, I believe.
Yes. How much faith do they have? So, yeah, we have to always look at when Jesus is around that everything's a test. a trial, a way of learning. Test is sometimes a bound way of saying it. What did the disciples say about Jesus?
Truly, you are the Son of God.
At the end of the feeding of the 5,000, the crowd also thought Jesus was at least a mighty prophet. Why did that bother him, but this does not?
That was a tough question. I couldn't really find an answer, but I guess because they expected him to be the Messiah.
Right. In the case of his disciples, they knew him very well. So when they said, truly you're the Son of God, they're waiting to hear what he wants them to do. In the sense of crowd, they weren't really that knowledgeable. They saw miracles and said, okay, we're going to force you to be king, never really listening to him. It's the same with us. If it wasn't free will, he would just force us to believe in him. But he wants us to understand with our minds what's going on, even if it takes some time. He's patient that way, but he knows that when you learn it, you're better for it.
When they had crossed over, they landed at
Gennesaret.
Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to him and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
Where did they land?
Gennesaret.
Yeah.
Gennesaret.
Yeah,
okay.
that's how I say it anyway. We'll see if it's right or not. Note what John says in John 6:21b. Immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Where did they start from?
Near Bethsaida.
Was Gennesaret where they initially were heading when they got in the boat?
No, it was Capernaum.
When the men of Gennesaret recognized Jesus, what did they do?
They sent word to all the surrounding country.
Right. Who was brought to Jesus?
All the sick.
What did the people beg Jesus to have the sick do?
Touch his cloak.
Right. What healed the sick, Jesus or his cloak?
Jesus.
Right. And here we are. Crossword. Okay, number 2 across. Aside from Jesus, who else walked on water?
Peter.
Number 4, shortly before
dawn,
Jesus went out to the disciples on the lake. 5, what did the people beg Jesus to have the sick touch the edge of his
cloak?
Yeah. 7, what was the closest town to where they started from?
Bethsaida.
10, Jesus went up on the
mountain
to pray. 11, when Peter saw the wind, he became
afraid.
Right. 1 down. Where did the disciples and Jesus land the boat?
Gennesaret.
Sure, that works. Number 3, what is the nearest town to where the feeding of the 5,000 happened?
Boat. What? Where did I put boat?
Number 3 down.
Yeah. Okay.
3 down. Certainly it might have been a mistake because there's only 4 things. So boat. You must have looked in the back.
Yeah, I did because I couldn't
Yeah.
find that answer.
Yeah. What town what town is where the disciples were trying to row to?
Capernaum.
Yeah. And 8, when they first saw him, what did the disciples think Jesus was?
Ghost.
And 9, the boat that the disciples were in were buffeted by the
waves.
Right. And so 3 down, even though it says boat, what is the nearest town to where the feeding of the 5,000 happened? That would be Bethsaida, right?
Bethsaida, right.
Yeah. Yeah, that is correct. All righty. I believe that, let me go ahead and take us off here.